All right. Did my hitting record mess up anything? Am I still coming through okay? All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Thank you to those of you who are here in person and to those of you who are listening after the fact to this recording. Thank you so much for tuning in and paying attention to what I think is a really interesting and productive interdisciplinary panel series. My name is Adam Larison. I teach here in the music program in the Department of Art, Music, and Theater at University of Illinois, Springfield. I'd like to just give a very short introduction to what this series is, what this particular iteration of the series is about, and then I will, as quickly as possible, turn it over to our guests after I introduce them. So, Idea Process Product is a series of interdisciplinary panel discussions and other events focused on creativity, broadly conceived. Idea Process Product takes as a given that creativity is the driving force behind all disciplines of thought. By discussing creativity and creative process in a vibrant, joyful, and interdisciplinary manner, we demonstrate a fundamental unity of all intellectual endeavors, no matter the discipline. So the topic of today's talk is uncertainty as a norm. And the idea behind this, for me, stemmed from what I believe to be a pretty common misconception that many people have about creative process. And that is that creatives, when they are creating something, somehow have a full picture of what that product is going to be in their mind before they start making it. And then all they have to do is just create what's already fully formed in their mind and put it out into the world, and it will be a success. In my field, music, I think that this misconception is most clearly embodied by the figure of Mozart, who was an 18th century Austrian composer who was said to have a sort of superhuman ability to conceive of massive amounts of music perfectly all at once and then simply write it down and put it out into the world. And this is reflected in this quote that is attributed to Mozart. And I say it's attributed to him, and that's an important point that we're not sure if it's his, but I'll come back again in a second. So he is thought to have said, "When I'm completely myself, entirely alone and of good cheer, my ideas flow best and most abundantly. Provided I am not disturbed, my subject enlarges itself, becomes methodized and defined, and the whole, though it be long, stands almost complete and finished in my mind, so that I can survey it like a fine picture or a beautiful statue at a glance. For this reason, the committing to paper is done quickly enough, for everything is, as I said before, already finished, and it rarely differs on paper from what it was in my imagination." So this is a very famous quote attributed to Mozart, but the thing about it is that it is likely not actually from him. It's unclear where this quote came from, but the fact that it keeps being attributed to him, I think, shows a desire on the part of people in my discipline to believe in this myth, that there are people in the world who can conceive of great things perfectly and all at once in their mind and then simply put them out into the world. So for a figure as heavily researched as Mozart to still have this quote misattributed to him, I think is evidence of the staying power of this misunderstanding that exists for many people. So today's panel, like all Idea Process Product panels, is bringing together creators from many different disciplines to talk about these issues that I was just talking about. We're going to hear from creators themselves about creative process and specifically about uncertainty that exists in creative process. So our guests today are Dr. Aristéa Mellos. Aristéa is a Sydney-based composer who has won many awards and accolades for her compositions, and she's currently on a North American tour featuring her preludes and duets, which she composed, I believe, over the pandemic. Bille Legge is an entrepreneur here in Springfield who's had his hands on lots of different projects, but is currently associated with the very popular and excellent coffee chain Grab a Java, which I am personally a big fan of and frequent quite often. And our final guest is Dr. Jorge Villegas, who is Associate Dean of the College of Business and Management here at UIS and is also a professor of marketing. So each of our panelists is going to give a short introduction. After that, we will have time for questions from the audience. Again, we're a small group, so I think this can be a rather intimate conversation, and I'm sure I'll have many questions myself. So the first person we're going to hear from is Dr. Mellos, award-winning composer from Sydney. Welcome, Ari.
Thank you so much for having me, Adam. And hello to everybody who's joining us now and who's listening to the podcast at a later point in time. Um, I'm coming to you from the Eastman School of Music today, so a little bit closer than Sydney. I'm in Rochester, New York, which made the time difference more amenable. But just as a quick introduction, I trained here as a student for a very long time. So I was at Eastman for about 6 years. I did both my master's and my doctorate here. And then I moved back home to Australia. And I've had a bit of an odd career. I think as a graduate student, particularly in the doctoral program, there was this assumption that we were being trained to undertake academic duties, that we would enter academia and that would sort of be the career path that most of us would have. And that really just wasn't the case for me as a result of returning to Australia, simply because the environment there academically is very different to the United States. There aren't very many universities or tertiary institutions. And so I've had to really cobble together a career as a freelancer, which in some ways is quite similar to what Mozart did. So it's just interesting that we've talked about Mozart and the kind of image that he projected of himself. If that quote indeed even came from him, we don't know. Because Mozart really was the first freelance composer, somebody who neither wanted to work for the church nor the aristocracy. So these large state-like employers who composers traditionally worked for. But Mozart really wanted to be a free agent. He wanted to write what he wanted to write when he wanted to write it. And he didn't want somebody else dictating his creative process in a way. He wanted autonomy over it. And he had a very difficult life as a result of it, because, in some ways, he laid the path for the remainder of us that followed in order to be able to have that kind of autonomy. And the Mozart assembly of skills. So many of you might know that he was a very good instrumental player, particularly a skilled keyboardist, also a very good string player. But he primarily made money from teaching, which is how I make my income, and teaching both piano, or it would have been a forte piano back then, not the piano forte as we now have, and also through teaching composition privately, which I also do. And then to try and self-promote, because he really had to hustle in Vienna after he left Salzburg, he was concertizing. And in fact, Mozart's sort of grave error was that he concertized so much that the audience in Vienna, whose taste was rather fickle, they were always looking for the new thrill or the new flavor of the month, got a little tired with him. And so concerts that had been very successful in the past, he had just difficulty getting the kind of patronage or audience attendance, which seems mental to us, because who wouldn't want to go and see Mozart live? But after a couple of years, he was just no longer flavor of the month. And so that's when he really begins having financial difficulties. But he's a fascinating character to study. And I think we all live under his shadow as composers, because we are confronted with I don't know how to say this in an erudite manner, but the awesome power of his genius. You listen to the work and it is perfect. And when we talk about the creative process, I think one thing that's so interesting is, because composers at that time were working by hand, and many still do, we have primary sources. So we've got their manuscripts and their sketches, or at least what they wanted to have survive as manuscripts and sketches. And I think this is a really important thing to note, because if you ever manage to see Mozart's autobiographical sketches, so things that he was writing by hand when he was first writing or composing a work, the sketches are flawless. I mean, it's really quite incredible. You'll go and see a draft of a symphony, and there are very, very few corrections to the manuscript. It's essentially perfect. And I think that's where this narrative comes from. And if you compare that to, say, a contemporary of his, Beethoven, who in fact wanted to study with Mozart, but never made it to Vienna in time. I think by the time Beethoven's carriage pulled in to Vienna, Mozart was being dumped into a pauper's grave. He just missed being his student. But he had originally left Bonn hoping to get to Vienna to be Mozart's pupil. Beethoven's manuscript is catastrophically messy. There are blotches all over it. Things are fiercely crossed out. There's annotations. So you can see that it's very possible that the creative process was different for these two people. And I don't really understand why it is that we preference Mozart over Beethoven in terms of a process, because both are valid. If you have incredible training and if you have facility that enables you to have a fluent creative process that requires very little modification along the way, then that's great, like good for you. But if you are more along the Beethoven line where there is struggle, I think we can all agree that the results yielded in the end are no worse than what Mozart left us in terms of a body of work. Both have produced great things, and they've made significant contributions to Western culture. So whether you're on the Mozart side of things or on the Beethoven side, it doesn't really matter, I think. And then to talk about my own process, as a composer, I sketch by hand in a very sort of rough shorthand. And in terms of how I'll work on a piece, I'll often have a very broad, general, non-musical stimulus. For example, I'm here at Eastman because tomorrow night, one of the composition and performance faculty here is giving the North American premiere of this body of work that I wrote during COVID lockdown, called The Preludes. There's a book of them that I wrote, a set of 12 works. And with each prelude, as I was writing it, I just had a general idea of what it was that I wanted to write. So let's say Prelude 2 was all about the anxiety one felt locked down in a small confined space. So it's about that anxiety. Prelude 3 was about teaching over Zoom. So I knew I had sort of different things that I wanted to explore in each of the works, but that was it. That was sort of the extent of the pre-planning. It was just a very broad idea, like a general theme that I wanted to somehow capture or evoke. And then, like most creative things, it's just a matter of trial and error and attempting. You've just got to get started somehow and take that first step, not be afraid to try something and see if it's any good. But you won't know if the idea that you've got in your head is even, I guess, going to issue forth any productive material until you attempt to realize it in some way. So it's all about trial and error. So often I'll just have this very broad outline of something that I want to write. Then I try to come up with a musical idea that to me expresses that very abstract thought. And then once I have my main material, I have to play with it in the same way that a sculptor might chip away at a piece of marble. I've got the sort of generic material, which for me isn't a piece of granite or stone or anything. It's musical material. So notes, chords, perhaps a melodic line, perhaps a bass line, perhaps a rhythm that's in my head. And then I just have to find different ways of looking at it as though it's in a kaleidoscope. And I'm just slowly turning the scope and I'm seeing what different patterns this source material might yield. And that's how I work. So it's quite a slow process. I'll never finish or start a work in one day. I think that's never happened to me. It requires time. I have to sit on it and ferment it. Sometimes I have to sleep on it for many days. I find running sometimes helpful because as I'm running, I can sort of run through the material mentally too. So sometimes doing something that's completely different to music, so not sitting at the piano, not being at an instrument, but having another sort of physical outlet will often help me process the information that I'm going over when I'm trying to do the creative work itself.
That's so great. You know, when you were talking about the differences between, you know, Mozart's manuscripts and Beethoven's manuscripts, I was thinking about how so much of my study has been on the very, very final product that a composer has created. And so in a way that's a bit misleading, right? Because I'm seeing like the end of a process that may have taken, as you say, may have taken years or even a lifetime. And so as you were saying that, I was thinking about, I was sort of going back to, to Bill's business of Grab a Java here. And every time I drive by that place, it's packed. It looks like it's running amazingly well. And I wonder if in some ways that's a little bit of an illusion, that's just the very end. That's the very end product of a process that might be quite messy and less certain than what it seems on the outside. So I wonder, Bill, if now's a good time for you to talk to us a bit.
Yeah, I preparing for today and trying to wrap my head around what did I have to offer into a discussion about creativity got me thinking, all the way back to my childhood. I was not someone that was gifted in the visual arts or the audible arts. And so I didn't see myself as having that creative knack. But I did know early on in my career that I needed to be in control over my own process. I didn't function very well in a corporate structure, much like Dr. Mellos was alluding to Mozart needing to be in control of his own creative process. I don't know that I saw it as a creative process, but that's what was happening in my mind. And then, for me, I started down an entrepreneurial journey, and the first thing I realized is that it is just a constant stream of problem solving. You never know what problem is coming next, and there's no roadmap that anyone's given you to fix it. And that's where that light bulb moment of creativity is happening in the entrepreneurial world, is in coming up with those creative solutions to whatever might be the challenge of the day. And that can be product related. It can be very physical problems at some of our locations. It can be with our people management, our marketing strategies, all of that. And so, I didn't even realize heading into it how much creativity was actually going to be required as an entrepreneur. And especially even within the entrepreneurial world, there's lots of franchises that can build out a map for you and a manual that you just go from one step to the next, but you get no control over any of the creative process. And also, it may reduce some risk, but I think it also potentially eliminates some of the reward from being an entrepreneur. So, for me, I look at the creative process every time a challenge may come up. And what I found is that there are those light bulb moments, but they don't happen all the time. And I have to constantly be focused on creating an environment for myself that is conducive to creativity. It's not just an automatic thing. I have to be very intentional about how I'm caring for my body, how I'm caring for my mind, what I'm doing with my time and my sleep. Because, with every obstacle that comes up, there's not always one clear solution. So oftentimes I'm trying to plan for 3 potential outcomes, and along the way, I know that I'm going to be taking 2 of those plans and throwing them in the garbage. But if I'm not trying to map out to 3 different destinations, I'm losing out on the opportunities that could potentially have required that. So, I do think it's interesting from an entrepreneurial standpoint being on this panel, because my look at what creativity is and where I need to pull from it is very different from those of the art world. But I do think they're very much intertwined.
Yeah, so as you were talking, I was wondering about and you mentioned this in our planning session before about this idea of creating 3 ideas, knowing that 2 of them are going to go in the trash bin. And I think for a lot of people that might be surprising, because I think there's a popular misconception amongst people that creatives create ideas that are automatically valuable and good. But I think this is probably true, Ari, as a composer too, that you you probably have lots of ideas that you don't even know if they are going to be valuable now or ever, or if they're even good ideas. Is that kind of accurate?
Yes, absolutely. I think part of the composition process is it's almost like brainstorming. Once you have, once I have my material and my sort of core idea, then like I said, I'm sort of flicking it around as though it's in a kaleidoscope to sort of generate new things that are related to it. But some of the stuff that I will come up with during that part of the composition process ends up being superfluous, or just it doesn't work. It won't fit with what else I'm writing at the time. And so often it doesn't get used. So because I write by hand, at least in the sort of preliminary stages of my composition process, and I sort of keep it in a book, I will have these little sketchbooks, just like Beethoven had, as sort of records of my ideas. And some of those ideas will never, ever be used. Some of them might be used in a different piece, not the one that I was initially first imagining they might be used for. But yes, you end up coming up with like materials in excess, and it's part of the process, because in some ways the composition process is problem solving too, because you've got this problem, which is your main material. And the problem is, how do I develop it? Or how do I tell a story with it? Or how do I take people on a journey with this sonic stuff, like this sonic material? And as part of figuring out how to solve that question, you're going to end up with multiple pathways, and you've got to choose the solution that works best for that particular piece. And so you will end up with stuff that you don't use, and that's okay. And one thing I'm always telling my students is to try and write with pencil and paper in these initial stages, because when we work digitally, like if we work straight into a like digital audio work sort of space, or even on computer software notation, the problem is that when you decide that you are having difficulty with a certain part of your piece and it's not working, the sort of instinct is just to delete it. And then when that happens digitally, the idea is erased and we lose it. But if you're working by hand, sort of manually, then the wonderful thing about sort of hitting a creative block is that you realize, okay, this idea that I had here, it's not working. It's obviously not the right idea for this place. And you can just make a note or just lightly cross it out, but you haven't lost the material itself. Because just because something isn't working right now doesn't mean that it won't work later for a different project, or that it's worthless, or that there's no value to it. So keeping a record that you can refer to at a later point in time is really helpful, because a year later, you might be working on a different project and you might encounter a different problem, and you might think, actually, you know what? I know what to do here. I've got the material. I've just got to go back to my old workbook. It's in here, you know? And having that record is very useful for that reason.
Bill, do you feel as an entrepreneur that you become emotionally invested in your ideas? And if so, is it difficult to let one go if you finally come to the realization that it's not working? I mean, I just know as a musician, sometimes I can become attached to an idea and I really don't want to let it go because I like it, but it just doesn't work. And I wonder if the same sort of thing happens when you're sort of building an enterprise.
You know, it does. And I think entrepreneurs need to be very careful of that. You know, I think it's natural for us to not want to let go of some of the good ideas that we have, no matter how poorly or well fleshed out that they are. I have found that, you know, the first thing I try to do with any idea is sleep on it. But then the second thing I need to do is get some outside perspective. And that for me is really hard, because I'm asking for criticism of what I may view as my baby. And of course, I'm going to take it a little personal. So I always have to be wary of that. But, you know, sometimes you just need help from an outside perspective to either give you that confidence you need to carry the right idea forward, or to maybe step back and say, hey, wait a minute, have I fully baked this idea, and is it going to have the impact that I intend? And that's not always the case. So yeah, it's hard, but you know, as an entrepreneur, if you're not able to pass up the ones you need to pass on, you'll be in trouble pretty quickly. I'd say, more than half of my ideas are not good ones.
Jorge, I wonder what you think about this from the marketing perspective, because it seems to me that, so far we've talked about creating products from the creator's perspective, but I wonder if as a marketing expert, if you come along at a different point in the creative process, that maybe the product is already complete and you have to sort of predict how it is going to be received by people and create a plan to get it out to them. And that's that's very dangerous, because that's an act of trying to predict the future, which is a little bit of what a composer or an entrepreneur tries to do. You're trying to imagine something that doesn't exist yet and put it out into the world.
Sure. First of all, thank you so much for having this panel. I think it's important to be aware that usually when we see marketing, we see advertising, we see sales promotion, but marketing is the creation of the product or the service, as well as much as the pricing, distribution of the product. So it's the whole caboodle. In some cases, we arrive late to the party, but in many places, it's the same thing. The creation of the product or the service is as important to us as the distribution, as everything else. And when I got invited to this panel, I was thinking about uncertainty and particularly new products and innovation. And that there's so many products that fail out there. One that I use in class, unfortunately, I don't have the product per se, but one company tried to do Gerber, the baby food for adults, so for grown-ups. Who came up with that idea? And so we got paid lots of money for that idea, right? But that didn't work. So basically, and I talk quite a bit with students about this, about why making creative decisions in marketing are so risky. One of those reasons is that we do quite a bit of research. We do market research. You can see what Procter & Gamble does every day. It's a huge amount of research. But there's flaws on research, right? From sampling issues, how many people you interview, who do you interview? The other thing is that, I kid you not, we make decisions in marketing based on a survey data. Says we interview 100 people, 90 people are willing to buy the product. How many people do you really think are going to buy the product? 90%? No, right? Just because you say something doesn't mean that they're going to do it. We lie all of the time as consumers, right? Because we just want the whatever, the $5 and just give me my money. I'll answer whatever you want. So one is that the research can be flawed or has some issues. The other thing is that we've seen creators that innovators that they don't really understand reality. One example of that is Theranos. Anybody knows that company? Is the company that did blood analysis, and the innovator in that company, Elizabeth Holmes, she wanted to do all kinds of analysis with one drop of blood. It's impossible, period. What she wanted to do is not physically possible in this planet right now. Maybe in 10 years from now, 20 years from now, but that at this particular time, it's just impossible. Use one drop of blood. Don't ask me why, but it's impossible. So there are products like that out there that you think you have everything, and the reality is that we're not there yet. Maybe 10, 15, 20 years, or maybe never. So reality has limits. As you can imagine, and we saw it, so we have seen it so many times, there are changes in the world out there. We've spent 6 months, a year, 2 years creating something. We go out into the market, and guess what? Pandemic, inflation, the competition. You have no idea how many times companies come up with very similar products, and they're not copying each other. It shows that the environment in the industry is very similar. So the same ideas are bubbling in different parts of the world at the same time. And really, there's no way to find out that someone from Australia and the United States, they copy each other in any way, shape, or form, but they come with the same product or almost the same. And the final thing that why so many products fail, on why there's so much uncertainty, I think all of us have cognitive blinders, right? There's so much that were willing to see, which, like Bill was mentioning, right? You get enamored of an idea and you don't want to, because it's your baby, right? You don't want to see the flaws of it. So that's important. We need to be aware that there are things that we don't want to change your mind about. And that takes time and maturity. And again, as the other panelists were mentioning, is part of the process, right? You need to accept, maybe not this time. Another thing that creators are human, and I'm going to show you an image very quickly. I call this creativity is in wide open spaces, but up to a point. So do you know this guy? Anybody know who this guy is?
George Lucas.
Is George Lucas the creator of Star Wars, right? And he did all of this, all the thing that you see behind you and around him. It's stuff that he did with gaffer tape, plastic, and just great ideas. Nothing else. Unfortunately, he created all these wonderful movies. He made billions of dollars, and we ended up with this guy, right? Personally, I don't like him. Okay, maybe just me. Why that happened? Because we believe that the more you have, the better. Turns out that sometimes it's better to have limits in what you can do. That's I hate that expression. That's the sky is the limit. No, it's not. You're here, or think outside the box. The box is quite useful for you to stay focused and to find things that are realistic and not, I can do whatever I want. I could create a whole new world, but I forgot the story, which happened with, again, my opinion, with the other three Star Wars movies. So all of this together makes a quite interesting world that you don't know what's gonna work, what's not gonna work. Just to give you a very quick example of something that I don't know if it's gonna work or not. Have you heard about this company, AIPIN? AIPIN? It's the substitution of the phone. They want you to completely forget your phone, and it's just voice activated, and you can use your hand to get some information, So the AI pin will send some information, like visual information, and you use your hand as a screen. Unfortunately, it's already out, and turns out that is $650, and the software is not that good. So, but if it's gonna be successful, I really don't know. I have a certain rules that you can use to see if somebody's gonna be successful or not. But in this particular case, I don't know. Maybe it's gonna be revolutionary, and we're not gonna use our phones anymore, or maybe it's gonna disappear in 6 months from now. Again, that's the beauty of innovation and creativity in everything that we do. We don't. Nothing is for certain, and this is a great example. And I wish them well. They have a great idea, but there's so much uncertainty on these products. Okay, so thank you.
I just have one more sort of follow-up question based on, I mean, I have many questions, but I have one more follow-up question I want to ask all three of you before we open up the floor to our small group of guests here. So as each of you was talking, it occurred to me that uncertainty is certainly a big part of the process for all three of you, because this is the world that we live in. It's an uncertain world. And when you're creating something, in a sense, you're trying to predict the future in a way. So I wonder, if you could answer the question of what is the source of uncertainty in your process as a composer, as an entrepreneur, as somebody who's an expert in marketing? What's the source of that uncertainty, and how does that, what's the process by which that uncertainty goes away as you're creating something? Or in other words, how do you become more and more sure that what you're creating is going in the right direction?
I think the answer to both of those is time. We'd mentioned, for example, that the world is changing around us. And as an entrepreneur, my business, and I think most businesses are really we sink or swim based on the people that we employ that are part of our team. My people are constantly changing, evolving, going through their own lives and their own worlds. And so their performance, their ideas, their limitations is constantly in flux. Our business is also changing. We're having to change how we do things in our operations to keep up with the competition. And then everything outside of our business is changing as well. So there's three constant moving pieces, and we're trying to come up with solutions for each, and we don't get to hit the pause button until we've come up with the solution. We're working on the solution as all three of those are evolving. So, in my world, trying to always at least have one or two backup plans available is helpful. But as time progresses, it starts to crystallize the direction that you need to head. So the uncertainty that time offers is the root of a lot of our challenge. But then also the time that passes helps crystallize the direction we need to head.
Ari, do you find that too, that time is the sort of crucial component?
Perhaps time is part of the solution, but I think in terms of the root causes of the uncertainty when I'm composing, it's very personal. I think because when I'm creating a new work, I feel like it's an extension of myself, and it's my way of expressing myself and my existence in the world around me. So any uncertainty that comes from the composition process is actually like my own uncertainty as to how I progress with this work, and like I guess any sort of insecurity about how I might feel on that day, like if I'm having a good day or a bad day. So if I'm at the keyboard and I'm struggling, or I've hit a sort of creative block, then the uncertainty is caused by my inability to find a path through. And so it's like my own failing on that day. Like I'm not coming up with the goods. And I think part of the creative process is just accepting that there are going to be a lot of those kinds of days where you don't progress very much, or you make very incremental progress. But I think now, speaking about the solution, which I think to agree with Bill, it's definitely time solves a lot of problems because it gives you perspective. So on a day where I'm not making much progress, I might only write like a bar or less, like a measure of music. And then I'll come back like a day or two later and I'll sit down and I'll be like, oh, I had such a bad day on Monday. Maybe today will be better. And I'll realize that actually that tiny material that I was able to write on that day, which I thought was not very good or perhaps not helpful, after it's sort of had time to sit in and ferment in my mind, I'll realize that actually it's great and I can borrow maybe a bit of it and then come up with something else. And then I'll have a very good day a couple of days later down the track. So I think the source of uncertainty is just, in a way, very personal because it's the process itself. And I am the process. I am the composer. But the solution is just not giving up and not becoming despondent when the creative process isn't fluent, and understanding that that's just natural and that there will be good days and bad days.
Jorge, I'm wondering what you think about this idea of time as someone who's in marketing, because I'm not a marketing expert, but it seems to me that in marketing, you try to create as much of a plan as you can, and then you kind of put it out into the world, and it's not until you put it out into the world until you see if it was a good plan or not for marketing that certain project. So I'm wondering if what role time plays in your discipline.
Yeah, that's a great question. And really it depends on the industry, the size of the company, and so on and so forth, because the small companies, they don't have time to do a big marketing plan because they don't have the resources, and they just like Nike says, just do it, and learn during the process. And well, large companies, they take their time, their effort, and sometimes that's why smaller companies can get into niche markets, because the large companies take too long to go into that direction. So therefore you just exploit that market for a little bit, and then you get out when the big companies get into. So I think time can be used in your favor by being quick, and in many cases, particularly in technology, there's this belief that get into the market, and if it doesn't work, get out of the market, try something new. That is a really hard environment, but that's certain industries do that quite well. And I tell to my students, be aware of your blinders, have mentors to help you in the process, but there's nothing like doing it. Whatever it is, go out there, sit down, write, create a product, create a service, and go out there in the market and try and fail, because we're gonna fail. All of us are gonna fail one so often. Oh my God, failure is so often, and it's the best teacher and the best way to say, you know what, I learned my lesson, move on.
I think that sort of gets to the heart of what I was talking about in my introduction, that I think that there's a popular misconception about creative processes, and that they don't involve failure, that it involves just bringing into the world something that's already perfect. So I love that. I think that kind of wraps up all the points you're making nicely. So we have a small but dedicated audience here. I'd love to, if anyone in the audience has questions or comments for the panelists. I have many questions myself, but I'd love to open the floor to anyone who might like to say something. Yeah, need to.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. I hope all of you can hear me.
Yes.
Yeah. So thank you, everyone. I think this was a very interesting topic, and to know about the creativity and innovation. And I agree. I think one of the panelists mentioned that you have to step away, and then you might get that creative idea. So I have two questions. One is, what's the difference between creativity and innovation? And how, in this current world of generative AI, the creativity of generative AI will impact the human creativity?
Not all at once, everybody. Jorge, do you want to tackle the difference between creativity and innovation?
Sure. I think at least my definition, no, I don't think there is a book definition anyway. Creativity, you see it in pretty much in every human process, while innovation is a more narrow definition, so to speak, of that you create something new. Creativity is solving a problem. Maybe you're going to solve a problem with something borrowed from somewhere else, or just a little bit of a new way. Well, again, in my mind, innovation, I see it that there's a product that is new, that is a new solution to a problem, or new music genre, or whatever. That's for me. That's innovation. Creativity is more a process that is everywhere, and it doesn't have to be something that changes an industry. It's just something that solves a problem. You can be creative in accounting, not too much because you end up in jail, but you have to be creative to solve problems, right? But it's not necessarily an innovation. It's just basically these little changes here and there. So at least that's my definition.
I feel like creativity is the process and innovation is the final product of the creativity.
Yeah, I agree.
I think in my own sort of learning about my discipline, I think that also innovation has this power to sort of change the work that comes after it as well. So for example, you can be very creative in an existing style, or you can do something in that style that somehow changes the way people think about the style itself. And then after that point, the style is different. And I think this is probably true in many different disciplines. Think about, for example, how everything that we buy is pretty much on, I mean, I'm exaggerating, but most of the things we buy are from the internet now. At some point, in the mid 90s, that was an innovation. It was an innovation to be able to commerce wasn't new. Commerce has been around forever, but that particular way of doing commerce was an innovation, and it changed the way commerce has been done since. So that's kind of my understanding of it. I don't know if that resonates with you, Ari, or not, or Bill.
Innovation is really, there's a timeliness factor that's required for that. I mean, imagine if today you innovated the absolute perfect hinge for a flip phone that would never break. It really doesn't matter anymore, because we've moved beyond that technology. So, innovation, I think, has to be the timely product of a creative process that happens at the right moment for it to really get its due.
To respond to Bill and everything that's been said before, I think when I think about creativity and how to define it, I think about my creative output and what is it that I'm seeking to do when I'm creating these works. And I think what I'm striving to do is to express something, or to communicate something, or to share something with people. That's how my creativity manifests itself. And then in terms of innovation, I think in composition, there are trends, like there are throughout the world in various fields. And innovation is really just another way of describing something that is trending, or that seems to capture the cultural sort of zeitgeist of the moment. That's how I describe it. And I don't actually know if innovation is crucial to the creative process, or if it's something that just informs it, or changes the way that creativity is distributed and shared in a way, rather than actually affecting the creative process itself from the originating idea, or from the material that you're working with.
It's almost like you're pulling things to innovate. You have to sort of pull things out of the nebula, right? I mean, like it's not, you're sort of, like you said, Ari, you're crystallizing something that's kind of in the air and sort of giving life to it. I wonder if this is a way to tie into Nitu's question about generative AI, because what generative AI does is it goes into the cloud and it condenses information out of the cloud into something. I don't know if it's new or not. That's the question, right? Is can those, can the computer take existing information and feel it the way a human being can, the way a musician can, or the way an entrepreneur can? And because it's not a science, it's an art to innovate in a lot of ways. Can the computer do that? I don't know. I'm not an expert enough in AI to comment on that, but it seems like the process is certainly there. There's an analogous process between, for example, a composer who is absorbing all the music she can all the time and then creating new music out of that interaction, or an entrepreneur who's so deeply embedded in the community that you sort of get a sense for the things that are going on in the community, opportunities that might exist, pain points that might exist, ways that you can create improvement for people. So that would be my question about is whether the computer has that capability, because we certainly know it can gather the data.
I mean, I feel like it's certainly trying to. I know that one of your previous speakers was Ollie Bone, who I know very well, and his sort of field of research is AI and its capacity to be creative, to generate creative works of art. And I feel like at this point in time, where we are in history, like AI's capacity for creating convincing works of art, it's like not quite there. It's still embryonic. I can always tell when I listen to something that's been AI generated that there was no human behind it, because there's something about it that's just not quite authentic or illogical. And that doesn't seem to work in the same way that when we look at AI photographs, we can often see minor flaws with parts of the body, like there'll be like 7 fingers on a hand or something that just gives it away. There's a giveaway when we listen to the music, but certainly we are headed in this direction where people are looking at AI's potential to create. And it'll be interesting to see how that evolves over time, and in what ways it disrupts the industry as we now know it.
Yona's had her hand up for quite some time. Yona, you still there?
Yes, I am. Thanks so much. Thank you for this panel. It's brilliant. I love the conversation. I had a question really for anyone, perhaps a bit more for a musician on the piano, but I'm curious about the implications of for teaching. So in the realm of music, but also across the board. I'm a musician, and I grew up studying the violin, and I think so often you hear people in the arts or musicians, they're so creative and they think creatively, and they're, this word is thrown at us so often, but so much of what we're doing, especially in the world of classical music, is actually trying to conform. And for example, as like an orchestral musician, never play a wrong note, never stick out, have your bow going exactly in the right direction as everyone else at all times. And so I think, we have students getting degrees in the arts or getting degrees in, let's say, music performance, and going out into the world, and maybe they haven't been trained to think creatively at all, actually. They're very, very skilled on their instrument or in their whatever area. And so I wonder if you have suggestions or sort of key ways of thinking that would guide, you think should sort of guide a teacher or an instructor trying to impart creative skills onto their students. I know there's a lot of discussion, especially now, that creativity is something that can be learned and can be taught. So from your perspectives, what should we be sharing with our students so that they emerge as successful musicians, but also entrepreneurs? And yeah, thank you.
I imagine that question could also be extended to the business world. That I imagine
yes,
teaching conformity to existing models, I imagine, is something that exists in many different disciplines. So I'll back off.
Yeah, if I may, really quickly, I teach marketing management, and I spend probably 80% talking about marketing. The other 20 is creativity and innovation. And I complain so much about every single company on the planet that they understand that whatever we're doing right now is not necessarily right. I don't have my niche with, I don't have a picture of Elon Musk on everywhere like that. Say, oh, let's worship this guy. Nobody deserves worship in this planet Earth, particularly innovators of any kind. So it's basically give them a space to be creative, give them the chance to understand that the world is not perfect. It will never be perfect, but you can do something this much to make it better for everybody. And if you do it through your creativity, hey, isn't that much better than just doing one thing well, whatever it is? But that's my point.
Yona, to answer your question, I think it's a great question, and it's a really pressing and important question, particularly in the classical music world, because what we essentially do when we train young musicians is we give them a very narrow skill set, and we get them to become very good at doing one thing, and yet a world outside of the conservatory, which is protected, it's meant to be protected, because how else can you preserve the art? It has to be, in a way, like a plant that's in a greenhouse. You need a very special environment for these people to develop their craft to a very high standard for the art to survive. But then we don't really deal with the question of, well, how does that person survive once they leave the institution? And I was just talking about this with the Eastman faculty here, and where our responsibilities lie as educators in terms of providing our students with a means to survival once they graduate, because I think this is really important. And as we were talking, one of the faculty said to me, one thing that we really want to try and encourage going forward is not just having a narrow skill set, that you need more than one skill upon graduation, and how do we change the coursework to equip these kids with sort of multiple strings to their bow, if I can use that corny term, because you will need to be able to sort of pull together a living, to cobble a living, because a lot of the traditional pathways for employment will not exist, or they will exist, but they'll be fiercely competitive because there'll be less and less of them around. And so we have to find ways, sort of like you, Adam, was saying, that, you know, your career's taken you on a path to teach classes that you never expected or anticipated that you would teach. We have to provide our students with skills, not just in creating or performing, but in surviving. And so that means learning other skills, learning how to market yourself, learning how to promote, learning music technology, learning how to interface with all of it, learning how the business side of things works. I think that's valid and it's important. And I think in a lot of very traditional institutions, it's overlooked, possibly because, you know, there's just not enough time to teach everything, and nobody wants to compromise. Nobody wants to reduce what they are teaching. But I think it's really important that institutions continue to innovate so that the students can survive. Because if in the end, if you're educating people and you don't equip them with life skills at the end of it, then the art won't survive either. So no matter how great the training is, if the kids that graduate can't then find work or a means to survival, they end up abandoning the field altogether. And then all that training gets lost and all that knowledge gets lost, because that's what we're doing. We're passing down knowledge. And in these great institutions like Eastman, you can actually trace your lineage all the way back to people like Mozart or Beethoven, because your teacher studied with somebody who studied with somebody, and it's almost like a family tree. And so we have these pathways of knowledge, and they're vital and special, but we also have to find ways of applying them in the real world and not ignoring the fact that times change.
Bill, I think we can throw it to you for the last word here. I'm really interested in this idea that both Jorge and Ari have talked about, and that Yona introduced about the, you know, when we teach, we so often rely on existing models because it's much easier to teach an existing model than to teach a model that doesn't exist yet. I mean, how would you even teach that? So I wonder, as an entrepreneur, how do you balance the need, as Ari is saying, to, and Jorge said, the need to constantly change and constantly adapt to new environments, with the fact that there are all these pre-existing models for how businesses and enterprises can run?
You know, in a lot of ways, I take those models and throw them out the window and try to look at our people, our business, our community, and where we're operating, and then make decisions from there. Too many times have I seen businesses try to take what works on the West Coast and implement it here, and they utterly fail. I have a collection of sweatshirts from coffee shops that have come and gone in the area because they didn't put in the time to really figure out the solutions for our community, but instead we're just trying to replicate a model they saw successful somewhere else, and didn't, you know, stop to think, hey, why wouldn't that work here? You know, I think, you know, in a lot of ways, creativity and the success with creativity can kind of tie back to you know, two things. One, Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hour rule, you know, that you know, put 10,000 hours of practice into something and you can master it. And we oftentimes, we only see that finished product. And so we just think that person's naturally gifted, without stopping to realize, oh, they put in their 10,000 hours. That's why they're this good. You know, I think the same can be applied to entrepreneurial success. You know, there's never a time where I could say, well, I know it all, so we're good. Now we can just coast on autopilot. You know, we have to always be paying attention. We have to always be learning and innovating and trying new things and failing over and over and over again to keep up with the demands of the changing world around us.
I think failing over and over and over again is probably a great place to leave it, and a fitting place to leave it. I want to thank Jorge and Ari and Bill so much for giving us some of your time today. Thank you to those of you who are in the live audience, and thank you to the future audience who will absorb this in recorded form. We do these panels every semester, so keep an eye out for the next one in the fall. I don't know what the topic of that one will be, but they're always great. So we'd love to see you in the future. And so thank you again to everybody, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Adam.
Bye.